Everyone thinks Stalingrad was the battle that sealed Hitler's fate. They're wrong. We all know the image, seared into our collective memory, the frozen, shattered city, the surrender of the once invincible German Sixth Army. For decades, history has pointed to this one cataclysmic event as the moment the Third Reich was dealt a mortal wound. It was the beginning of the end. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the war was already lost for Germany, long before the first German soldier froze to death on the banks of the Volga? The day Germany truly lost the Second World War wasn't in 1943. It happened more than a year earlier, and it wasn't a battle lost by a general in the field. It was a decision made in a room hundreds of miles from the front by Adolf Hitler himself. This is the story of that day. The day an unforced error, a single declaration born of arrogance and terrible miscalculation, opened the floodgates and unleashed a power that would inevitably grind the Nazi war machine into dust. This is the story of the day Hitler truly lost the war. To understand why the war was already lost, we first have to appreciate the powerful myth of Stalingrad. And let's be clear, it absolutely deserves its legendary status. The battle, which raged from August 1942 to February 1943, was apocalyptic. It was a meat grinder that consumed armies and leveled a city. For Hitler, taking the city became an obsession. It bore the name of his arch-nemesis, Joseph Stalin, and capturing it would be a massive propaganda victory. Strategically, it would also secure the German army's flank as they drove south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, the very lifeblood of the Soviet war effort. Stalin, for those exact same reasons, ordered the city defended to the last man. The order was chillingly simple: not one step back. What followed was some of the most savage fighting in human history. The Luftwaffe turned the city into a sea of fire, and the ruins became the battlefield. Under General Vasily Chuikov, the Soviet 62nd Army burrowed into the wreckage, defending every street, every building, every single room. Battles were fought for apartment floors, collapsed factories, and through the sewers. The life expectancy for a new soldier could be less than 24 hours. The fighting was so intimate and brutal the soldiers called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. By November, the Germans held almost 90% of the city. Victory seemed just days away, but they had stretched their lines dangerously thin, leaving their flanks guarded by weaker Romanian and Hungarian armies. It was here that the brilliant Soviet general Georgy Zhukov saw his chance. On November 19, 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive pincer attack that smashed through those weak flanks. Within days, the trap snapped shut, and General Paulus's entire Sixth Army, some 300,000 men, was caught. From his headquarters, Hitler forbade any attempt at a breakout. He promised he would supply the trapped army by air. It was a promise his Luftwaffe chief, Hermann Göring, knew was impossible to keep. The men in the pocket slowly starved and froze. When General Paulus finally defied Hitler and surrendered on February 2, 1943, his army had ceased to exist. Of the 91,000 starving survivors who went into captivity, fewer than 6,000 ever saw Germany again. The numbers are just staggering. The Axis suffered around 800,000 casualties, the Soviets over 1.1 million. It was a catastrophic defeat for the Wehrmacht, the first time an entire German army had been wiped off the map. It shattered the myth of German invincibility and permanently shifted the momentum on the Eastern Front. From then on, the Red Army was on the attack, all the way to Berlin. It was, without question, a very big nail in the coffin of the Third Reich. But the coffin had already been built. To find the moment that truly sealed Germany's fate, we have to go back in time. Our story starts not in the frozen East, but on the coast of France in the spring of 1940. Hitler's blitzkrieg had been shockingly successful. German tanks had blasted through the Ardennes forest, sliced through the Allied lines, and trapped the entire British Expeditionary Force, BEF, against the sea at Dunkirk. Over 338,000 men were caught, their backs to the water. Their total destruction seemed inevitable. This was it. The moment Germany could have won the war in the West. Wiping out Britain's entire professional army would have been a devastating blow. The pressure on Winston Churchill to sue for peace would have been immense. German tank commanders like Heinz Guderian were just miles away, ready to deliver the final crushing blow. And then the unthinkable happened. On May 24, 1940, an order came down directly from Hitler: halt. The panzers were ordered to stop. Guderian was, in his own words, speechless. For 2 crucial days, the German generals watched in sheer frustration as the Allies organized a desperate, miraculous evacuation. A motley fleet of Royal Navy ships and hundreds of civilian boats, fishing trawlers, yachts, ferries, braved German bombs to shuttle soldiers from the beaches back to England. So why did Hitler give that order? It's a debate that has raged for 80 years. His generals were nervous about their exposed flanks. The marshy terrain around Dunkirk wasn't great for tanks, and the boastful head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, had personally promised Hitler his planes alone could finish the job, a promise he spectacularly failed to keep. Some even think Hitler let the British go, hoping it would make them more willing to sign a peace treaty. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. By the time the halt order was lifted, it was too late. The core of the British army had escaped to fight another day. Churchill called it a miracle, but it was a miracle made possible by a German mistake. This wasn't the day the war was lost, but it was the day a quick victory was thrown away. By failing to destroy the British army, Hitler ensured that Britain would remain in the war, a defiant enemy, a base for future invasions, an unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of Europe. The war would go on. The next critical mistake came a year later, in the spring of 1941. With Western Europe under his boot, Hitler's gaze turned eastward to his ultimate goal: the destruction of the Soviet Union. The plan was codenamed Operation Barbarossa, and it was set for May 15, 1941. Speed was everything. The German High Command figured they could shatter the Red Army in just a few months, well before the Russian winter set in. But then, a problem popped up, courtesy of Hitler's ally, Benito Mussolini. His botched invasion of Greece had turned into a humiliating mess. Even worse, the British had sent troops to help the Greeks, creating a threat to the southern flank of the upcoming invasion of Russia, and more importantly, to the Romanian oil fields that fueled the entire German war machine. Hitler was furious, but felt his hands were tied. He had to intervene. In April 1941, German forces swept into the Balkans. It was another stunning victory, but it was incredibly costly. Not in men or material, but in the one resource Germany couldn't afford to lose: time. The entire Balkan campaign forced the postponement of Operation Barbarossa by 5 critical weeks, pushing the start date from mid-May to June 22nd. On that day, 3 million German soldiers surged into the Soviet Union. At first, the advance was staggering, but those 5 lost weeks were a creeping, fatal poison. The autumn rains, the Rasputitsa, arrived right on schedule, turning Russia's dirt roads into rivers of mud and bogging down the German advance. And then came the winter. It arrived early in 1941, and it was one of the coldest on record. Temperatures plunged to 40 below. The German army wasn't ready for it. Their whole plan was for a short summer war. They didn't have winter clothing. Lubricants froze solid. Engines wouldn't start. More soldiers suffered from frostbite than from combat. The great advance ground to a frozen halt in the snowdrifts just outside Moscow, close enough to see the spires of the Kremlin. That delay, caused by a sideshow in Greece, meant that Operation Barbarossa had failed. The Germans were now stuck in a long war of attrition on 2 fronts, the very thing Hitler had always sworn to avoid. And yet, even now, the war wasn't definitively lost. Germany still controlled a huge chunk of Europe. The Soviet Union was teetering. The path to victory for Germany had narrowed, but a path, however slim, still existed. It would take one more decision, one final unforced error, to close it off for good. The date is December 11th, 1941. 4 days earlier, Japan had attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. The United States, a sleeping giant that had stayed out of the war for 2 years, was now at war with Japan. At this moment, Hitler faced the single most important decision of the war. He was allied with Japan through the Tripartite Pact, but that pact was defensive. It said Germany only had to help Japan if Japan was attacked. In this case, Japan was the aggressor. Germany was under absolutely no obligation to join Japan's war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt now had a political problem. The American people were furious at Japan, but many were still deeply isolationist. Getting Congress to declare war on Germany would have been difficult, maybe even impossible. The strategically brilliant move for Hitler was to do nothing. Let the US get tangled up in a massive war in the Pacific, thousands of miles away. He did the exact opposite. On December 11, 1941, Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag and formally declared war on the United States of America. Why? Why voluntarily bring the world's greatest industrial power into the war against you when you're already fighting the British Empire and the Soviet Union? The answer is a toxic cocktail of arrogance, ideology, and a complete failure of strategy. First, Hitler viewed an eventual war with America as inevitable. In his twisted mind, declaring war now was seizing the initiative. It was about prestige. As his foreign minister said, "A great power doesn't let itself have war declared on it, it declares war itself." Second, he held a deep contempt for America. He saw it as a weak, decadent, mongrel society that had no will to fight. He was convinced Japan would keep the US military so busy in the Pacific that it couldn't possibly intervene in Europe in any meaningful way. Finally, he was frustrated with the undeclared naval war already happening in the Atlantic, where US destroyers were helping protect supply convoys to Britain. He thought a formal declaration of war would finally unshackle his U-boats to choke Britain into submission. In that one moment, with that one declaration, Hitler solved all of Roosevelt's problems. He united the American people against the entire Axis. He gave Roosevelt the green light to implement the Allies' prearranged Germany First strategy, and he signed the death warrant of the Third Reich. He had, by his own hand, created a war he could not possibly win. The consequences weren't immediately obvious on the battlefield, but in the factories and shipyards of America, a giant was waking up. Hitler hadn't just declared war on a country, he had declared war on an economy so massive it would simply crush him under its weight. We've all heard the term arsenal of democracy, but the scale is almost impossible to grasp. As the director of American war production put it, "We won because we smothered the enemy in an avalanche of production, the like of which he had never seen nor dreamed possible." Let's just look at the numbers. By 1944, America's GDP was more than 3 times that of Germany. The combined economic output of the Allies was nearly 10 times that of the Axis. The war had become a simple, brutal math problem, and Germany was on the wrong side of the equation. From 1941 to 1945, American factories produced an incredible 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, and millions of trucks and guns. By 1944, the United States alone was making 2/3 of all Allied military equipment. While German factories were being bombed around the clock, American industry, safe across an ocean, ran 24/7. At its peak, Henry Ford's Willow Run plant was churning out a B-24 bomber every hour. This industrial avalanche didn't just equip America's military, it fueled its allies through the Lend-Lease program. The aid that flowed to the Soviet Union was a direct result of Hitler's declaration of war. It included over 375,000 American-made Jeeps and Studebaker trucks that gave the Red Army mobility it never had before. It was more than 12,000 tanks, 14,000 aircraft, and millions of tons of food. Crucially, America also supplied raw materials, like over half of all the aluminum the Soviets used and the high-octane aviation fuel that was critical for their air force. After December 11, 1941, every battle was fought in the shadow of this new reality. The defeat at Stalingrad was made irreversible because the Soviets were now backed by a bottomless arsenal. The Allied landings in North Africa, Italy, and finally Normandy were only possible because of America's overwhelming power. Germany was trapped, fighting a two-front war of attrition against enemies who could replace every lost tank and plane infinitely faster than they could. For over 80 years, Stalingrad has been seen as the great turning point of the war in Europe, and it was. It was the moment the tide visibly turned on the Eastern Front, the start of the long, bloody road to Berlin. But the war was truly lost for Germany long before that. The seeds of defeat were sown with every mistake. A squandered victory at Dunkirk kept Britain in the fight. A fatal delay in Russia brought General Winter into the war. These were terrible errors. But the final, irrevocable mistake, the moment from which there was no coming back, was not a battle. It was a decision made by one man in a moment of supreme arrogance. On December 11, 1941, Adolf Hitler chose to declare war on the United States of America, an enemy he could never, ever outproduce. He unleashed an avalanche of production that would bury his 1,000-year Reich. The fate of Nazi Germany wasn't sealed in the rubble of Stalingrad. It was sealed in Berlin on the day Hitler chose to fight the world, and the world answered. But that's my take. This debate is one of the most fascinating in all of military history. Was it Dunkirk, the failure to take Moscow, the catastrophe at Stalingrad, or was it Hitler's declaration of war on America? Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you believe was the single event that sealed the fate of Nazi Germany? I'd love to hear your perspective, and if you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing for more stories that challenge how we see history. Thanks for watching.